Yeah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Greetings to you all. This is your co-host. This is one of the co-hosts of the Fudger Club, Nafis Abu Zaid, and with me is my other co-host, Akil Ingram. And one of our co-hosts will be joining us shortly, hopefully. And this is episode two, pretty much, of the Fudger Club podcast. And we apologize for you guys for starting a little bit late. However, the episode is pretty much called The Viewing or Viewing the World Through the Eyes of the New Muslim, which is an in depth discussion uh, dealing with the first or in the first stage of the cognitive model that was laid down by our co host, and the framework was put together by our co host, Abdul Haq Baker. Akil Ingram could pretty much shed some more light on that.
No, you pretty much mentioned it. What we want to begin to address in this particular discussion, or at least open the discussion of, is the experience of and the service provided to an individual who has newly embraced the faith. Um, and we say that and we speak to that from personal experiences, ourselves as individuals, and engaging with other peoples who have newly embraced the faith.
Okay. And can you finish elaborating?
Sure. So we can open this discussion, and I'll speak to my own personal experience. I embraced Islam pretty young, as a teenager, about 13 years old or so, and Islam, in the early '90s. It didn't come to me by way of the internet and things of that nature. I had never been to a masjid before, didn't know what one was, all of that. I simply came across a couple of Muslims who lived in my neighborhood and embraced Islam on that. Now, interestingly enough, after having embraced the faith, um, I was not able to engage with those individuals anymore for about 2 to 3 years. So I had a large gap of a disconnect of anything that had to do with Islam, other than the little bit of information I had prior to embracing the faith of Islam. And um, this type of experience, it can be reflected in what many people experience today, in that many people today are embracing the faith of Islam, or learning about the faith of Islam, not necessarily by them engaging with Muslims or being at a masjid or such. They see Islam in the media. They see Islam on the internet. They search on the internet. And this is becoming a common motif now at this point, where you come across people that they embrace Islam solely off of the information that they've come across online. And in that, they often experience a large gap as well. And it is a very lonely space to exist in. And it is also a space where there is a lot of inaccurate information that a person may come across. And it can be very daunting, and it can be discouraging for some to continue on with the faith. Now, from this group, you will find people who will eventually reach out, those who are more assertive, reach out to the community, find a masjid, or come across a Muslim, something of this nature. Um, and then those, we can attempt to catch them. But this is an ongoing issue. And I'll raise a second thought, and this is something that I think more people will be familiar with. And I'll speak to the area where I am, in the what they call the DMV, the DC, Maryland, Northern Virginia area, or in the Baltimore area as well, because I function throughout the entire of that space. There was a time where it was not uncommon to come across up to 5 shahadas in a week. Um, at this point now, right now, real time, we may be experiencing 2 to 3 new shahadas within every couple week period. And what is interesting is that this is how it goes. Um, an individual will come to the masjid with a friend. They want to come on Friday. They want to come on Jumu'ah. They want to wait until after Jumu'ah. And then they want the imam of the masjid or the khatib to sit with them and give them their shahada. So then that happens. And then after this experience, I would say 70% of the time, you don't hear anything else back from that person from that point forward. And but what's interesting though is that these people still identify with Islam, but they have no understanding or practice of the faith, and they're out there functioning in society, and then maybe they come back around sometime later, maybe a few months, maybe a few years, but
Mhm.
they've been representing the faith of Islam, and they haven't been able to spiritually develop themselves throughout that period of time. So these are two challenges that I think that are quite common and need to be addressed, and solutions should be provided for.
Yes, I totally agree with you, brother Akil. As far as my experience of being an imam for the last past 8 years or so, I witnessed some of that as myself. Some people coming into Islam and the way that they have been exposed to Islam, and when they do come, you might see them on a Friday, for example. They might meet the resident khatib or the imam. You know, they exchange some pleasantries, introduce themselves, and so forth. And then you don't see from them, you don't hear or see them. You know, like you said, it can be months later. It can actually be, you know what I'm saying, a year later or so that you might hear from them. And that challenge of how their spiritual development is taking process, you won't even know because you lose contact with them. And I think what I wanted to address a little bit, just dealing with the framework, so that those people who are watching can understand. If you didn't catch the first episode, we're talking about the founding stages. The first stage in the cognitive model that our brother laid down was, you find that when people come in to Islam first, when they first come into Islam, you have this eagerness. I know for me myself, I was, when I came into Islam, I was extremely, eager. I wanted to learn everything at that time. And you read stuff and you hear about things, and the first thing you want to, but you get a little bit sad because you don't see the same thing that you read in the books, or about the stories of the companions and the prophets when you meet other Muslims. So that was one of my experience, coming into Islam. So I just wanted to take a look at that. There's two things that are taking place here.
Mhm.
One, there is an individual obligation once you begin your quest as taking your shahada. Let's just say your shahada is the starting of your quest. There's an individual obligation there on the individuals themselves. All right, and later on, maybe in the show, I will bring some, some proofs to highlight that. Then there's this communal um, sense, this community sense thing, brotherhood or sisterhood, this camaraderie that you're looking for or that is a part of Islam. Okay, and then it approaches from that perspective as well. So I want to take a look at both of them, hopefully to probably provide some answers or some solutions to these challenges that we see people coming to Islam, don't further their spiritual development, like you're saying, and two, the way that they might be exposed to Islam, right?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And what I would offer, I think this should be looked at, one, like you're saying, from the perspective of the individual, and then from the perspective of ourselves, with regards to a person that has newly embraced the faith of Islam. And with regard to the individual, what I would submit the new Muslim focus on, and also those that are engaging with the new Muslim, focus on two areas, and that is spirituality and prayer, aqidah
Okay.
and salah. That firstly, there needs to be focus on the building of the faith of the individual and the theology of the individual, the beliefs of the individual, learning who Allah is and what our relationship should be with Him, learning about our belief system and what we do and do not believe, and utilizing that to build a relationship with Allah as well as the creation of Allah. Um,
Mhm.
Now, this is something that will build faith in the individual. And of course, as you build the faith, then it requires faith in order to perform the actions of the faith. So the more we can build the faith, the more we can perform the actions of Islam. And secondly, I would say to learn to pray and then actually praying consistently, like in real life, right?
Right.
And if we can achieve those two, then we'll find that many of the other areas of the faith will organically begin to fall into place. However, if we enter into the other areas of the faith before we're stable in spirituality and in prayer, then it can become quite challenging to maintain our spiritual maintenance and our spiritual growth. Um, Now, that's with regard to the individual. With regards to ourselves, we can't take responsibility away from ourselves. And I mean this as the collective of the seasoned Muslims or the organizations that are in place in order to service the Muslims and the non-Muslims as well. That
Mm-hmm.
may be the masjid, that may be some other form of a nonprofit or some other service that Muslims are providing for the people. Now, I believe that at this point we have to be a bit more. We're beyond the mom and pop phase. We just are, right? So we need to be a bit more pointed, and we need to look into customer relationship management systems. This is really what we need and how we need to look at it. And in that, when the people are coming in, we need to kind of know, who the person is, what their contact information is. We need to be able to have a committee of people that are engaging with them. We need some tasks for them to be able to complete and provide an orientation for them so that they can become settled in the faith and they know that they're being supported throughout this process. Because again, their entire worldview often is changing. Um, they're no longer as relatable to their friends and family as they used to be, and having a support system to allow them to be able to engage with that and navigate that, I think would be something that holds high value.
Yes, and I totally agree. If we could set up a program, or masajids can set up programs, or dawah centers, or any organization, as you mentioned, can set up programs where they have an orientation phase, where they actually, gather information of the individual who comes into Islam and help them along with that process step by step. I think that should be set. I mean, responsibility. Also, I would add to the responsibility of that community that new shahada come into, is that when giving someone a shahada, I think now we have to really pretty much give them like a class, give them some more detailed information uh, pertaining to the shahada itself, so that they can understand the individual obligation that they have, as far as their spirituality, as far as that no one else can come in and just help them out in their spirituality, as far as the obligation they have to do that themselves. But if
Mhm.
that not made known or clear to them at the time they're given their shahada, sometimes they leave with the sense of, okay, I might get back to it, or you understand what I'm saying, or okay,
Right,
maybe
right.
I they don't develop on it. But if you explain to them, like, no, this is an actual covenant that you're taking with your Lord, and you are required now that you have taken the shahada, that you have to do X, Y, and Z. And to begin to build that, you have to build this relationship to your Creator, as far as learning about who He is, his name, his attributes, so forth and so on, and educating them, and then directing them to where they can further that education at. And I know some people might say, well, all of this might not be needed at the time, because a person is, just taking their shahada. I mean, this is no proof and evidence that you have to give them all of this. But I honestly, um, I beg to disagree, because of the time that we're living in now, and the fact that most of the people who are converts, they don't know Arabic. So in terms, they don't understand what the shahada actually entails. You're having them
Right.
repeat a statement behind you, and you're translating the statement for them, and they still don't know what that statement actually means. And sometimes the person who's giving them shahada don't really understand the implication of the statement themselves. So I think that you should, at that point, teach them further, so that they can. And this is all and very important, because again, at this founding stage, as you mentioned, their worldview is shaping. You understand what I'm saying, brother Akil? Their
Absolutely.
worldview is shaping. So at this time, you're playing an instrumental role in developing their worldview. You understand what I'm saying? When giving them the shahada. So I think that part, should be understood. There is a twofold responsibility taken there. And like you said, the communities nowadays, instead of being too preoccupied with multiple different things, and I know the communities can be busy, and I'm talking about organizations and massages now. I believe that they should develop a program where they become more community outreach in terms of being familiar with each member of your community, whether new one or old one. You understand? So they can feel that brotherhood or that sisterhood that they're going to need, not only at the time of marriage, when you're filling out an application and you want to get married, not at the time of when you want counseling, not just only be at the time, but at the time of your very intake of coming into Islam, you should know that, hey, I have a community. I am a part of a community. You understand? I contribute, and that community actually helps.
Right, absolutely. And when we're speaking to CRM, when we're speaking to customer relationship management, it doesn't have to be overly sophisticated in the beginning. It can be an Excel spreadsheet. It can be something like Podio. It could be something that is along this type of a line. It's just some way of tracking who the person is, what their name is, how do we contact them, how do we invite them out, who is maintaining the relationship with them, who is the person that brought them in to take their shahada. Because a lot of times that person we don't necessarily have a strong relationship with, right? That person may be only coming around on Jumu'ah or every few Jumu'ahs or so. So to your point, we also I would submit that we need to be aware of where the person is coming from that is coming into the faith, and I'll unpack what I mean by that. People learn differently, and people are coming into Islam with different motivations. So when I say that people learn differently, some people can sit down with a book in front of a teacher and be okay with that in person. Other people, they learn better by way of audio, others by way of video. Other people, especially today, many people are learning on their own, in their own free time, at their leisure, on their phones, right? In their homes, on the way to work, or whatever they're doing, not necessarily just inside of the masjid itself. And there are other people that when they're coming into the faith, they're coming into the faith because of the character of the Muslims, not necessarily the information that is available. It's because of their experience with some other Muslims. Um, Other people, it is the information. So they value data, right? And it can go to the other side of the spectrum even. And this is a real time experience. I remember about a decade ago, we had this flash of youth that were embracing the faith of Islam. I mean, as young as 12 years old, 9 years old, coming to the masjid on their own, wanting to embrace the faith of Islam. And we're like, all right, you sure you understand? I'm like, where's your mother? Where's your father? Are they okay? That type of. But these people were actually serious. And with that, though, what we eventually learned with some of these teenagers that were coming in is that they were intrigued with Islam, but they also were deeply involved into street life and street culture. So because of that, they were actually creating their own fraternities, as it were, right? Some of us will call them gangs, right? So they would create their own system of operating in the streets, and then utilizing their identification with Islam as a part of their code. So we would get people coming to the masjid in droves, young guys, teenagers, mid-teens, early 20s, embracing Islam. And their main concern was, okay, so when do I get my Aki name? I want my Aki name, right? And to them, that was a marker to say that they were officially a part of this private fraternity that they created for themselves in the streets, right? So as a part of their code, you have to come to the masjid, take your shahada with the imam, and then you have to be granted your Aki name, as they call it. and now you're officially a part of their group, right?
Mm.
And then once you have that, they can go out and begin operating how they were operating, right? One of the groups, they called themselves the Kufi Boys and whatever else they were calling themselves, right? And they were out and they were involved in behavior that is unbecoming of a Muslim. And it was literally to the point where principals of schools in the area, where individuals involved with the police, um, captains of the police force and such, were coming to us, asking us to come out and engage with these individuals in their schools or in their other places of work to try to curb this problem, because they realized that this wasn't what Islam represented. But nevertheless, these young guys are intrigued with Islam and they weren't listening to them, and they know they would listen to us. So I say that to say that there is some degree of a disconnect at times of us functioning inside of the masjid within our own four walls and what is going on outside of the masjid, in the streets, in colleges, in the workplace, in the military, because this is where the people are who are embracing Islam, and they aren't necessarily coming to us inside of our buildings all the time and consistently. So this actually requires of us to be able to go out to them and engage with them if we're going to be able to manage this properly.
And honestly, you're right. We do need to develop. When I say this, that it would be better that organizations like you said and masajid should develop a outreach and program where they can educate individuals such as like you said in these fields or these areas that are embracing Islam, but doesn't come all the way to those buildings or to the masjid. Instead of being enclosed and closing ourselves off. Alhamdulillah, our brother Abdul Haq Baker has just joined us.
Allah.
Instead of
Assalamu
being
alaikum wa
rahmatullah.
Ahlan,
How
ahlan.
you brothers doing? Now, the
All right.
sound on the phone is not very loud, so I know you can hear me, but I
No.
think StreamYard's doing something with using phones, so you're gonna have to speak up and give me that chance to hear you. And I want to apologize to you, my brothers, and those viewers, because we're experiencing something of a new phase in UAE. We are now aligned with our weekly calendar with the rest of the world. So literally we work on Fridays for half a day, and then we have a 2.5 day weekend. But those of us who are in management and leadership positions have not been able to realize that half day relaxation today. But from next week, it shouldn't happen again. So I'm explaining
So,
and the mitigating circumstances. So again, apologies, but I'm here for the rest of the show, inshallah.
Barakallahu fi. As and as I was saying that I think like you're saying, I killed just piggybacking off what you're saying, you're right that the outreach should be there. But I do want to remind organizations and masajids that when it comes to situations such as you have just described, they should not place the blame upon themselves in regards to this, or should feel any type of way because it's out of their control. And I'm going to use an example of Masjid Dural. And it comes in Surah At-Tawbah. Allah Jalla wa'ala talks about that, telling the Prophet ﷺ not to deal with these individuals. They had an ill intent from the beginning. They wanted the Prophet ﷺ to come pretty much give them like a tazkiyah, if he prayed in their masjid. But they didn't build a masjid on a foundational point of taqwa, as Allah mentioned to him. It wasn't that. So Allah told the Prophet ﷺ, don't stand in their masjid. So when you have individuals who come in with an intent, like you're saying, the Kufi boys, not for the information, not for Islam and what it stands for, but for their own version and to create their own gang and have their own identity, then that is something that the Muslims, I believe, should not feel any should feel any way about that, because that's out of our control. You understand?
From what I could hear, mashallah tabarakallah, yeah, I'm in agreement with you. And if I may, I know you've been discussing up until now. I wanted to, from what you're saying about those who bring their own identity and everything, very good points from what I could hear from you on that. But I wanted to revisit the framework that we're discussing, the framework that I prepared. And I want to make it clear. There's something in some of the discussions that were taking place in the WhatsApp groups, which I think were excellent. We've got to be clear on one thing. Whenever academia is brought into the deen, and you have those who have studied, okay, you'll find that there are elements among us who have not studied, okay, but they may have picked up on religious learning, which is good, which is commendable, but they're not approaching that religious learning with the discipline of what is required from study. And what they end up doing is they start condemning or casting aspersions upon the academia of those who have studied that route. And that's secular knowledge. But also, they will then, as we've seen, do likewise with those who have studied religious knowledge and gone through the faculties and the procedures in that regard. So I think it's very important that I mentioned this at this point, because some may feel, okay, he's bringing a framework, what's it got to do with the deen and everything like this? And this is underpinned by deen, and you confirmed that in your review, which was really, really good, Brother Nafis. You confirmed that when you were looking at it, because I think you were addressing some of those potential questions that might come. Okay, Quran and Sunnah, Quran and Sunnah. The Quran and Sunnah is comprehensive. It's comprehensive, and you'll find that it covers every aspect of life, knowledge, and learning, from engineering, from science, from education. So those who are approaching it from a very, very basic perspective, more often than not, they're threatened by this. This is why they want to diminish it. And they should understand this is actually complementing, confirming the efficacy of the deen and the comprehensiveness of the deen. So I applied that framework when I was interviewing the Muslims I was engaging with, when I was doing participant observation. And I will share this with you from a British context. A number of individuals who read my work, lay people, came to me and said, we wish we knew we were going through this, because we would have understood where we should have been with regards to development on the deen, and what we were facing and going through from a socio-cultural perspective. We had no idea. We just had that idealism. We had that abstract approach, thinking this is what the Sahaba did, and we applied it, and we found that we became strange in our society, which strangeness is not wrong in and of itself, but they found the mental health issues. They found a lot of things that they weren't fitting into the Muslim communities, because they just didn't understand what was happening to them as converts. And I think that we could speak to that, because we didn't have anyone holding our hand. We just had abstract knowledge and the application of that abstract knowledge, which then became a dystopia instead of the utopian ideals we were seeking.
Okay, so let me submit this thought to you. Do you believe that there is a misunderstanding in the purpose and function of academia, and how going through that process can service our understanding and practice of the faith? Do you think that is where some of that is coming from? How would you kind of posture that?
I think that's a very good observation, Brother Akil. And yes, I do. I think that is an aspect that, and it's emanating from those, again, you have to look at where it's coming from. And by and large, it's coming from those who haven't studied, who haven't completed rudimentary academia, secular knowledge. And I'm not saying that in absolutes, because many haven't completed that, but they've still embarked religiously upon the discipline of learning. Do you understand what I'm saying? They've embarked upon it. They've found it challenging. Like I know, for example, a student of knowledge, white European, when he came out to Medina, in order to learn the Arabic, and they said, you are going to have to go back to secondary school. This was a 24-year-old young man. And he went into an Arabic secondary school and was with 12th graders. They looked at him, person with a beard and everything. But he understood that I need to come back to this. This isn't for everyone, in order for me to get the fundamentals, to grasp the basics and move forward. He actually started teaching me Arabic, and he's the only person to this day. I don't speak Arabic fluently and everything. He moved and he's in Riyadh now, alhamdulillah. He's for today, to date, he is the only one who taught me Arabic in a way that I could comprehend and how children learn, because he went through that process, and he's one of the strongest Arabic speakers that I know, mashallah, tabarakallah. So what I would say to round off just the answer in part to what you've said, because I don't want to go on as long, and I want Brother Akil to be speaking today, mashallah. But I think it comes down to what you were saying in the follow-up chats, Brother Nafis. There needs to be, you said two things which I loved: sincerity, ikhlas, and there needs to be humility. And when we have those two, we can be really good receptacles of learning. And Nafis, this is a very important point that you made, and I think we need to emphasize that. And we're talking about the conversion stage, converts. We came into the deen with a lot of haughtiness, arrogance, rivalry. This is how we used to project ourselves, and we can go into all the psychoanalysis of that. Was it because of what we faced, the legacy of slavery, oppression, and everything? All of that can be discussed another time. But the point of the matter is that coming to learning, whether it's academic, secular, or religious, which is the peak, religious, we need to ensure that we come with sincerity and humility. And if we do not come with that, do not embark upon the pathway of learning, because you will not be learning, you'll just be gathering information. And it brings me to the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ warned about getting knowledge to compete with the scholars and to debate and argue and everything. And we're in that time now, especially amongst the Salafis. Yes, it happens amongst other denominations and everything, but we've seen what's happened amongst our community. So again, 3 times the Prophet ﷺ used to emphasize things. This is my 3rd time: ikhlas and humility. And then brother Akil, if those are in place, irrespective of the individual's lack of knowledge or training or the pathway of academia, he or she will be ready to learn. They will be ready to absorb and to practice if they have these 2 ingredients, characteristics, inshallah.
Go ahead, Nafis.
Yeah, what I was going to say is someone asked the question in terms of the difference between the study of academia and as the study of the religion, and how two of them coincide with one another or support one another. I just wanted to make something clear. Also, in regards to a call,
please talk up a little bit, Nafis. As I said, my sound is really bad.
I just want to make something real clear. The origin of a caller, when they call, they have to make sure they take in the state and the condition of the people that they're calling. So some people don't have an academic background. Some people don't have that type of being way of learning. So, for example, you look at the hadith of Mu'adh. When the Prophet ﷺ sent him, to the people of the book, he gave him some beautiful instructions, all right, in regards to the people that you're calling, giving him some background. Okay, you're going to the people of the book, make sure that you do X, Y, and Z. But allowing him to know the people that he was going to gave him an advantage to know how to direct that dawah. Okay, right. If I'm going to apply this. The ayat where Allah Jalla says we have not sent any messenger except that we sent them in the tongue, as we mentioned before, of the people to speak in that language. The athar of Ali ibn Abi Talib, where he says, when you speak to the people, speak to them where they can understand. Do you want them to deny Allah and His messenger? I think what I'm trying to say is that all of these things coincide to the fact that the caller needs to be able to gauge the audience he's talking to. If that person needs an academic approach and the caller doesn't possesses that approach, meaning that they may have not been disciplined or studied in regards to that, then a little bit more to what Abdul Haq is saying, they shouldn't belittle it because it's academic. They shouldn't make it seem as if it's something foreign to Islam to learn that way. Sheikh Uthaymeen, he made a beautiful point when he was mentioning about the title headings and something that's called they call them babs. You know what I'm talking about, abwab and stuff like that. these breaking down of terminologies, categorizations, different things which you see in fiqh and you see in Mustalah Hadith. He says somebody might ask you and say, okay, during the time of the prophets, this wasn't there. During the time of the companions, these breaking down or categorizations wasn't there. It wasn't this, and that. Someone might make this argument. So Sheikh Al-Demin said this falls under another principle that what we do this so that we can make it easier now, right? Brother Akil can help me out with this. We can make it easier now for others can understand. So it doesn't innovate into the deen. You didn't add anything new to the deen by bringing in this approach, this academic approach to help out. You understand? You didn't, you know what I'm saying? So they can get it. So, okay, we got these categorizations, we got this many conditions, you got this many, etc. Even though the companions didn't need that. You understand what I'm saying? But just to make it more easier for other people, it developed into that. But that doesn't, you understand? I'm trying to hopefully that shows you how they both can complement each other. That's what I was trying to do. I don't know if I did a poor job.
Let me dovetail your point. And I believe something that we should acknowledge is the difference between the Eastern educational system and the Western educational system with regards to its approach to education, right? With regards to its pedagogy. And what I mean by that is what is commonplace in the Eastern educational system is that there is a focus on, let's say, memorization, often rote memory, and then from there get to understanding. Whereas in the Western educational system, we may find a focus more so on understanding and concepts, often in the abstract, and then throughout that process, coming into some form of memorization. So it's two opposite tracks, but the goal is one of the same in the end. And I mention this because when we are engaging with peoples that are new to the faith and they're entering into the faith, we may not realize that the training that we have gone through in the East is different than the way people are used to receiving information in the West, right? On top of the fact, in Eastern training, we are learning traditional sciences of our faith, but we aren't necessarily learning, for example, education as a field of study. We aren't necessarily learning psychology as a field of study. We aren't necessarily learning pastoral care as a field of study, right? Yet these are some of the services that are needed in order to reach them where they are when a person is coming into the faith. And in bridging that gap, we may be able to curb or to suppress some of the extremism that can come out in the initial phases of the faith when we come in and we're taking everything in its literal sense, and not understanding that we're taking it in a literal sense based on what we understand it to mean in English and in Western culture, and not necessarily what it may actually mean as intended by Allah, as intended by His Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. But I thought that's a point that should be highlighted.
And that was a beautiful observation that you made too, Brother Akil. Thank you for that, putting that in there so eloquently. You know, I was fumbling around here, here, my brother Abdul Haq Baker, but it is important. You're right in regards to understanding a little bit the difference between the Eastern approach of study of religion and as far as the Western approach of how they study information or how they take in information. Their educational system is a contrast. So when Brother Abdul Haq Baker is saying is that, okay, we get these brothers who may have studied in the deen, but then they are pretty much not aware of these nuances, if you will. They're not aware of them. So when they come back to the West, to the people that they're going back to, when they want to approach Islam, it doesn't sort of pretty much, show a level of respect for those who actually did study and are aware of this academic approach. So it makes the student look a little bit kind of crazy, because he's out of touch with the people that he's talking to, or he is making it seem that he's belittling that academic process. And just to go back to a little bit of that founding stage so that we can stay a little bit on topic here. And I appreciate Brother Haq Baker bringing in that point with his framework, is that I honestly believe that the new Muslim world is being shaped at the beginning. not in the end. And that's why I keep thinking it's so detrimental that they understand the difference of the roads here. Allah has a verse where He says, "Man jahada," whoever strives, for innama yujahidu li nafsi. Whoever strives, they strive for the benefit of their own selves. Allah says, "Man amila salihan," right? Whoever does a righteous action, then they do it what? For li nafsi, for themselves. The point I'm trying to make with these two verses is that there is an individual obligation upon the person who beginning his quest, the new Muslim. No matter where you at academic, no matter where you at education, no matter where you at period. If you accept Islam and it's made understood, you take the Shahada, it becomes an individual obligation and responsibility upon you from the onslaught of your quest. You need to understand that. That needs to be made understood to them. So they can realize that Allah is not going to question them about the community that they were in, whether or not the community actually provided for them this information. Allah is going to question them in regards to the covenant which they supposed to have to fulfill with the Shahada. That's one thing. The second thing I want to make understood that when Allah talks about community, He mentions something very key when it comes to community. Allah says, وَمُؤْمِنُونَ وَمُؤْمِنَاتٌ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ. All right, showing that the believers are what? Nothing but helpers, friends, and confidants, etc., to one another. يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. They commanded good and they prohibited evil, showing the stability that's brought forth from a community obligation, right? How they actually interact with one another, how they remind one another, how they uphold the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order to function as a social community, right? وَيُطِيعُونَ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولُهُ. Allah says, then they obey Allah and they obey His messenger. That's the Sharia. They obey that. Then Allah said, أُولَٰئِكَ سَيَرْحَمُهُمُ اللَّهُ. These are those, if they do all of these following things as a community, Allah will have mercy upon them, etc. I think you get the point what I'm saying, right, Akil? In regards to this, that, you know, the communal obligation is that they uphold the Sharia of Allah. They remind, they command that which is good. They exalt that which is good, and they prohibit that which is evil. Okay, I'm not saying that they do this without knowledge, of course, and I'm not saying that they do this hastily, and they don't have patience and forbearance. I'm saying that if they understand these things, this is what the community does. So that's what I wanted and I'm about to stop right now. That's what I want the new Shahada to understand. You're coming into a twofold, an individual obligation and a communal obligation. How do you make them two? How do you bridge the gap between the two? That's something I hope we can provide in the show. Akil, you got something to add to that, or do Hakmaker?
Yep.
Go ahead, Akil.
Sure. So let's build on your thought process of communal obligation, right? And I'm going to mention something, and for sake of time, I'm going to kind of combine it.
Okay.
I'll speak to a conversation that I had with Sheikh Salih al-Suhaimi, as well as Sheikh Ibrahim al-Rahiri, Sheikh Fahd al-Fahid, and Sheikh Ahmed, all separate occasions. And we were speaking about kind of prioritizing our efforts in the West, okay? And without fail, something that was common, that was mentioned across the board from them, was that you all are in the place that is the epitome of kufr and shirk, right? Of disbelief and creation worship. This is the source of where it's coming from in the entire world as our postmodern world exists, coming from there. So understanding this, if that is the case, your focus should be more so on Iman and Kufr, Tawheed and Shirk than the other areas of the faith, right? Your focus should be on the non-Muslims and the areas that they have challenges with, and inviting them to the faith of Islam, right? Also, similarly, I had a conversation some years ago with Sheikh Salim Ibn Sa'd al-Tawil. May Allah preserve all of them. And even when we are looking to some of the newer Muslims that have come into the faith after we have engaged with these non-Muslims who are now becoming Muslims, how can we not prioritize our effort to these people when they are the majority of the people that we're dealing with? The majority of the Muslims that are actually around us are newer Muslims than they are seasoned Muslims. How can we not prioritize that, right? Yet, I've come into this particular challenge. I would like to hear if you all have come into this particular challenge as well. Yet, when we have the person that is new to the faith and we're thinking about what to do for them. Maybe it's a book to give them to read. Maybe it is some type of service we want to provide to them, and we have to think, okay, what book can I actually give this person that's appropriate for you where you are, right? What service can I connect you with that's appropriate for you where you are right now? Because many of our services are actually pointed toward the seasoned Muslim, the more developed Muslim, than it is the person that is newer to the faith. We don't have a lot of those materials and a lot of those services. There has been an increased effort in more recent years, but it's not sufficient, right? But it's not
Mm-hmm.
sufficient. So I say this just to speak to what we are prioritizing, right? Because sometimes we get so pigeonholed, and we speak to issues that are very important, and they're also very sensitive, but we don't realize that we may be speaking to, let's say, 5 to 10,000 people, when really there are millions of other people that need to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
I think some very good points there from both of you. I would come at it from this perspective. Again, I developed these frameworks in working. Last week, we spoke about acknowledging that we're not the dancing, singing jack of all trades. We've got to see where we are positioned societally in the wider macro context, and on a community basis amongst the Muslims on a micro context. What do I mean by that? I developed a funnel theory positioning various religious ideological delineations and groups according to a funnel where the gravitational pull and was towards marginalization, extremism. We mentioned this last week, and where the various communities were positioned from the most liberal, which is where the gravitational pull is very loose and free, and as it gets stronger, to a more violent, extreme religious delineation. And charted across that funnel from the top to the bottom were various communities. The Salafi community being at the neck of the funnel, where the gravitational pull towards extremism was strongest, but where the Salafi communities were the most effective in combating that toxicity at that particular stage. As that pressure gets lighter as you move up the funnel, you have other communities, such as the Muslim Brotherhood, Sufi communities, others further up, right till you get to the top where there's no gravitational pull at all, and you have that liberal, progressive, everything goes, the mix, everything is thrown in at the top there. Now, why am I bringing this? Because once we can acknowledge where we are within a particular mosaic or framework within society, then we can speak to our strengths in addressing the needs of those converts that come amongst us. And I alluded to this last week in our discussions. So theologically, doctrinally, with regards to worship and these important aspects that we are saying are the primary or priority matters that they need to deal with, we are very well equipped to be doing that. It's when we try to tell or inculcate or persuade those community members, those new Muslims, that we can provide them with everything else as well, from socio-economic to socio-educationally. And we are not equipped. We do not have the basis and the resources, human, financial, or otherwise, to do that. And then that's when we start seeing, in some areas, a ghettoization. We need to be connected more widely and acknowledge that there may be those further up the funnel that might have a very good educational system and can provide for those converts, those new Muslims in that area of a particular type of education. We heard, as I was listening to one of the brothers, Ali Davis, and he a very excellent talk he's doing to new Muslims, and he was speaking about an organization that had set up a medical center for the Muslims and non-Muslims to attend free of charge in the region and the area that he was living in. We may not have those facilities there as well, and we may need to send our community members further up. What we have now, and other communities with other delineations have this as well, they don't want to let go of their cohort. They don't want to let go of their members, even if it's to the detriment of those members, because they're saying if we let them go here and get education, if we let them go there to the Salafi communities to learn theology, then we will lose them and they will not be upon our ideology and our methodology. And I'm speaking to all Muslim communities in this instance now. We need to stop thinking in that micro insular perspective, because it's destroying the chances, the opportunities for growth of those new members that come within the community. Now, I'm going to give an example. When I was speaking with Dr. Khalid Green, when he was studying in Yemen, and there were some brothers who came to Sheikh Mukbil. They were living in, I think it was Sana'a or in a different region. And they came to the Sheikh and they said, Sheikh, we live too far from you to be able to come to the classes. Our families are in another city. And Khalid explained this to me. And they sat with Sheikh Mukbil. And the college that or university they wanted to go to, they were firm in their Aqidah. They were firm in their manhaj. They knew the inhiraf and the innovations of the institution generally. But for some of the sciences that were being taught, they asked Sheikh Mukbil, rahimahullah, can we do this because of the situation that we're in environmentally? Sheikh Mukbil said yes. This is Sheikh Mukbil now. So my point is, we need to be able to discern when we cannot provide for the new converts in a particular area, and having grounded them in the Aqidah, the manhaj, the spiritual aspects, focus. We know that they are safe, like when we raise our children. There's a time when they have to leave, and we have prepared them enough to go out into the world. All communities need to be able to have that maturity and concern for the overall development of those new Muslims that come into our community.
Yeah, absolutely. And you remind me of a point of horseback in what you're saying. I'll let in a little bit more on the discussion with Sheikh Saleh Suhaimi, may Allah preserve, from some years ago. And he was mentioning, he was speaking to us in America, but I believe that this can extend out to the West broadly. He was saying that you all are a minority within a minority, right? And I will add to that, within a minority, right? Where we are triple layer minorities. So because of that, he was saying that you all can't afford to split and divide yourselves, right? You can't afford that because you haven't grown to that level yet. Also, this reminds me of a statement that Sheikh Ubaid Jebedi had made this back in the late 90s, and where he was speaking, he was actually speaking, giving advice to our fellow Muslims in Britain. And he was saying that we can do and say some things in our country that you all can't do and say in your country, right? And I say those two things to say this. There are overarching challenges that the Muslims will be facing broadly within these non-Muslim lands that we're living and functioning in. And because of those challenges being overarching, and because there's a non-Muslim majority, when it comes to the non-Muslim majority, we can't afford to appear as though we are disunified in front of them, right? We can't afford that right now. So with any type of challenges that we may have on a micro level, we may need to seek those things in certain settings, in certain environments, in order to address those particular challenges. But on a macro level, we don't need to make it appear as such. And I don't say this to say that we don't need to distinguish between Tawheed and Shirk, because we do. I'm not saying that we don't need to distinguish between Sunnah and Bid'ah, because we do. What I'm saying is, and I hope that I'm speaking to the point that you're making, Dr. Baker, we need to acknowledge that we are functioning on different levels of the societies that we live in, and we need to engage each facet of that society appropriately. And when we do that, it will create a proper import for those that are coming into the faith from outside of the faith of Islam.
And I totally agree. Hold up, I totally agree that in regards to that, we have to stop pretty much worrying about those individuals who chose to place themselves on the island. Just as the Sheikh Tishkafin is mentioning, Dwakil mentioning, if we the minority of minority, then we cannot keep focusing on those who chose to place themselves on the island. And for those who are looking at those who place themselves on the island and do not want to interact and do not want to, reach out, so to speak, to other people and expertise in areas that they can provide that they cannot provide, and they fall short, and then they need to look at that as being something that is not correct, whether they are screaming minhaj from the top of their lungs or whether they're screaming akida from the top of their lungs. It is not correct, because the Prophet ﷺ demonstrated to us what? That even during the time when they would have captives that was non-Muslims, in order for them to learn and to free them, he would have them teach them how to read or so forth, right? He utilized the understanding that, okay, we might didn't have this expertise, but we have someone, even though they're not of the same faith, that can actually teach, you understand, and actually help. When those times or those scenarios present themselves, then we need to do that. So if we need people and expertise as far as social, as far as economics and so forth like that, then we need to reach out, especially when we're a minority. You understand? And since you mentioned Sheikh Mukbil, it's funny, interesting enough, you mentioned him, rahmatullah ta'ala, it's already understood that he stayed in a language program that was taught by the Zaydi Shiites, right? He stayed with them in their language program for at least he did like two terms in it, in regards to not to go to their other, their Akida course and everything like that. But he stayed really in the classes of the language, but he took it from them. Even though their Akida wasn't the correct Akida, it's still a time where you have to reach out. That's my point. I'm saying you're going to have to branch out. And it shows us the importance, as Brother Akil was just saying, it shows the importance that unity is really, really paramount. We need to be able to at least, we can't afford, it's a disadvantage to be disunified. It's a disadvantage, especially when you're in a minority, to be disunified. But we need to stop at the same time wanting to work with others who don't see this as an issue, working with others who don't understand this as an issue, because some people are closed-minded and some people don't understand certain things outside on a broader scale. So we shouldn't focus on them. We should focus mainly so on reaching those massages and those organizations that are willing to be unified and willing to step outside of the parameters, so to speak, so they can get things done for their community. As Dr. Hawk said, I'm gonna stop here, social, religious, social, economics, right? And social, I think he mentioned one more other thing, I think social, spiritual, right?
Social, spiritual, yes, mashallah.
Huh?
And what I would say, Brother Nafis, alhamdulillah, and yes, just reinforcing what Brother Akil and both what you've said, everything was very pertinent. We're not saying unity in every aspect, because that is not possible from a point of elements of socio-religiousness.
No.
Disunity will continue as long as there are elements and communities amongst us that are upon shirk and bid'ah. And we are not saying that there should be any compromise or negotiation whatsoever in those aspects.
I'm talking about unity within the brothers and the sisters.
No, I agree. What I'm saying, I'm speaking to the same point. The same point. I'm agreeing with you. As Akil has highlighted, speaking to that funnel theory that I developed, there are different levels, there are different stages, and we need to become more discerning, as I've mentioned, of the stages. The three of us are here, and I'm sure if we were to apply aspects of the framework and Deen and this complete plethora of areas that we need to look at, we would be at different areas and levels according to these particular framework, religiously and academic. And there's nothing wrong with that. One thing that we are clear on, I think, with all three of us here, and hence why we're doing this show, hence why we are so connected, is that upon Tawheed and upon the Sunnah, there is no disagreement, there is no disunity. And this should go out as a message to many others on a wider context, that is where the foundation needs to be built. And that's where it needs to end when you are crowning the communities that we are belonging to. So not disunity there will be disunity in some particular areas, but we're looking to achieve unity in those areas, which fosters development individually and collectively. That's what I think is what needs to be emphasized, and you've both emphasized that, I think, very, very well. I hope I've contributed coming in late to that particular point. And my cognitive development framework discusses all of that, every aspect of that, referencing the dean and referencing the aspects, as we've mentioned, Nafis, socio-economic, socio-cultural, socio-spiritual, social, educationally, all of them embedded in the prophetic way of teaching and the seerah, embedded in various elements that are there in the Quran. And also when we look at Islamic societies as they were developing. But one caveat we need to really mention here now is that we do not live in Islamic societies. So we should not be trying to replicate something micro or macro when the overarching framework is antithetical. And that doesn't mean that we then embrace that overarching framework, but it's like two bulls butting heads, or a bull butting its head against a mountain in trying to implement something that is not contextualized, that is abstract, and then it gives the impression of behavioral extremism, and at its very worst, ideological extremism, which then places the spotlight on targeting our communities, because hikmah hasn't been achieved by those who should be at that stage of wisdom, because they're applying things out of context and they're dragging those new members and our sisters who are in the community, whether new or established, down that funnel and that gravitational pull, which is only going to marginalize our communities and stifle them even more.
Absolutely. And to edify your point, Dr. Baker, and I'll just be very, very frank for sake of time. I know we're coming up on time. We have to understand and accept that in the West, we are pioneering right now. We are creating history right now as we are working through these challenges in the West to set framework and foundation for those who will be coming after us. And again, I know that we're coming into on time. I know we're after the 1 hour mark. Nafis, I don't know if you can pull it up or you saw it. I saw that Chaplain Antigua had some form of a comment that had come up maybe about 20 minutes ago or so, a little more. I don't know if you can see it.
What was it pertaining to? What was it pertaining to? Give me an insight.
It flashed and then it dissipated.
Oh, no. That's what I placed up. We addressed that. We addressed that earlier about the difference between the religious study and the academic study and how we could bring it different. I addressed it. Someone else brought another question, though. Honestly, I can post it here for you guys to see real quick before we close out.
Assalamu alaikum. Please consider that there may be people who see this who have no idea who the scholars you are referring to are and why they should be paid attention to.
Okay. I mean, if you want to address that, you can. If not, we can say that for the next show, or we can stay there for the Fajr Club Q&A. Mm-hmm. We do have a Fajr Club WhatsApp, guys. That is a Fajr Club Q&A where you can post what you felt about each episode or some of your suggestions. I don't want you to feel shy. We have to remove ourselves from the taste that Muslims are feeling ostracized, and this concept of wanting to be comfortable around the non-believers and not comfortable around the believers. I think that's playing a double face. Like, we need to be able to open up a little bit. I mean, hopefully people start opening up on Clubhouse. We was on Clubhouse. We see some people wanting to interact, and some people just wanted to just pay attention and not say anything. No, open up a little bit. That's what they made those platforms for, is to be social. And I want you not to feel like you're going to be ostracized because you say something. It's not like that. We're not approaching it that way. You don't have to be 100% a scholar or a student of knowledge or so forth and so on. No, you can come in and be yourself. As long as you ain't saying nothing that we have to, by Allah, say, yo, brother, or sister, can you be respectful? But that's what it is. So yeah, we can approach that question if you want to, Akil, right now. You want to approach that question? Or?
Very briefly, and I'll allow Dr. Baker yourself to ducktail if you like. And again, I know we're past time now. Okay. Firstly, to our brother and our Sheikh Abdul Qadir, may Allah preserve you. Wa alaikum assalamu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You're right, and we are conscious of the fact that there may be people that this reaches who will not be familiar with some of the names that we mentioned. At the same time, the first step is exposure, right? And I'm saying this because I was the one that mentioned, I was the one that was name dropping scholars, right? So we have to begin with exposure to this so that people can become familiar with. While this may not be the platform to necessarily speak to the detail of who each individual is in their caliber. To your point, I believe that's why you're making that point. We do have to take a first step in the process, number one, and number two, we also on this platform have to be very real and honest with regards to what our own experiences have been. And because our training has come from these particular scholars and these particular personalities, at some point we do have to give favor to them and reference them because it is simply our experience, right? And again, to the thesis point, if we do need to expound, we're totally open to discussion and to building. The WhatsApp group, the Fajr Club Q&A is present, and many have already been engaging in discussion, including Chaplain Antigua, including yourself, Sheikh Abdul Qadir, and we can continue to engage on these type of topics if we need to delve into further detail on a matter that isn't necessarily the primary topic of our discussion in a particular episode. Appreciate you all.
Barakallahu feek, everyone that tuned in. But next time, our brother Abdul Haki already apologized, gave us his thing, inshallah ta'ala, perfections with Allah. So sometimes give us a room. We would like to start at 7 a.m., but give us a room. At least give us about 20-minute room, man. You know how we are sometimes. And inshallah ta'ala, we'll keep you posted whenever we start. But we'd like to start at 7. But if we can't, give us that little bit grace period there. And inshallah ta'ala, hopefully make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, please. Brothers, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure you like us up on Facebook as well as on the Apple Podcasts. We do have Apple Podcast page. We're on there, the Fajr Club, and you can get each of the episodes that we do. And stay tuned for another one, inshallah ta'ala, and join us on Clubhouse. This is your host, Nafis Abu Zaid, and my co-host.
This is your brother, Akil Ingram.
And this is your brother, Abdul Haq Baker.
And we thank you all for tuning into the Fajr Club. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.